started. We're going to start with some introductions and then kind of an opening activity, kind of wake everyone up and get our minds going thinking about presentation skills. But just to make sure everyone's in the right place, this is the Improving Your Presentation Skills workshop put on by the Growth Professionals Committee and the Joint Student Affairs Committee. So to start off, my name is Nick Mason. I'm a PhD student at Cornell University. I work with Ruby Levitz, and I see like this way.
I'm Sara A. I'm a postdoc at the Center for Conservation Genomics, which is a part of the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. So we're just up the road 10 minutes at the National Zoo.
My name is Matt Carlin. I'm on the faculty at the University of Wyoming.
And I'm Scott Taylor, and I'm on the faculty at the University of Colorado. First time I've ever said that. A group of people.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So to start with, I think if we could all move to the front half of the room, that would help us kind of improve our environment. So let's have everyone move up to the front half of the room if we can, and then we'll get started with our first activity. What's that?
Keep going, you're doing great.
Yeah? Okay, so to get us started, what we're going to do is I want everyone to either, if you have a pen and paper out or just kind of in your mind, I want you to think about 3 questions. So the 3 questions, or thoughts, I guess, maybe not questions, are 1, think about an effective presentation that you've seen and think about what made that presentation effective. Why was that a good presentation? Why do you remember that presentation? The other thing I want you to think about yourself as a presenter, and what is one strength that you have as a presenter. The last thing I'd like you to think about is, again, think about yourself. What is one weakness that you have as a presenter? Okay, so take a minute to either write down some notes or just think about this on your own. Think about one effective presentation that sticks in your mind. What about it was effective? Why is it memorable? Think about yourself as a presenter. What is at least one strength and one weakness about yourself? Okay, and then I'll stop you guys in a minute or so and we'll go on to the next phase. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is to turn to someone next to you in groups of 2 or 3, preferably someone who you don't know. I would like you to share your thoughts in terms of effective presentations, yourself, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. So groups of 2 or 3, the people around you, take a few minutes to share your ideas. Okay? Yeah, so I figured maybe one of us could share one of ours. I wrote some stuff down.
When I was aggressive, I would literally practice like all my No. I was nervous. Not the one thing that's is teachable knowledge. I literally just
Take about another minute, so make sure everyone in your group has had a chance to share in a minute or two. Okay, so let's come back together. I think maybe some of us, we'd like to hear from you all, but I think a few of us will maybe share some of our thoughts too in terms of what we remember about some effective presentations, our strengths and weaknesses. Maybe I can kick us off. So at Evolution this last time, Erica Bree Rosenblum gave a fantastic talk. She's one of my favorite speakers. She is really inspiring, I think, and uses a lot of popular media in really effective ways to really drive home particular messages. In terms of me as a speaker, I think that I move around a lot, and I've been told that I use like weird hand gestures sometimes. So that's one of my weaknesses. And my strengths are that I think that I have a decent like projecting voice, and a decent like pace or maybe cadence to the way that I speak.
Well, I'll just answer the first one. So an effective presentation, we all have a friend, Yula Kapanakos. She's not here at the meeting this year, but she gives fantastic talks. And I think one of the reasons why is because she starts off with a really good story. She's got a great speaking voice, and she really draws you in. And she uses movement, like her gestures are sort of all over this space. And so she's just a very good storyteller. And I think that's a great way to start a talk, if you can. Hers are usually like longer seminars, but you have a little bit more time to work with.
So I do have ideas about effective presentations, but in the interest of time, I'll just share what I think are some of my strengths and weaknesses. One is, at this point, I feel like I'm fairly good at making slides, at putting together slides, slide design, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And still, one of my biggest weaknesses is just how nervous. Probably a lot of you are here because you get nervous before you give talks, and the same thing still happens to me. I've been giving talks at AOU since 2006, and I've taught undergrad classes for 6 years, and I still get nervous speaking in front of people.
I guess in terms of weaknesses, I don't know, maybe weakness isn't a great word because it has negative connotations, but I think a lot of us do get nervous, and so finding strategies to deal with nerves is something we're going to talk about. But I would say all four of us out here still struggle with nerves when we're giving talks, whether we seem comfortable or uncomfortable. Hopefully the comfortable one. But yeah, so I think for me, still dealing with nerves, especially in groups of people that you don't know. I don't recognize more than 10 of you probably, and so that for me is something that would cause me to be a bit more nervous than normal. So that's probably my biggest weakness. I won't go into anything else because we're going to move on
question maybe?
Oh yeah. We don't care about your ideas. Really great way to.
Who's up for sharing?
So we had, I'm Charles, this is Tiana, Beverly and Tiana. I think the thing I heard above all in terms of like aspects of good presentations that we heard, the top one was actually sort of an enthusiasm, confidence, and charisma, so that someone has enough energy to overcome that nervousness or use it in such a way that you're sitting there thinking, wow, this person is so excited about the topic, I want to hear about it now. And that sort of would, I guess, overshadow other potential problems with the presentation. We didn't get to talk about weaknesses much. But from Tiana and Beverly, I heard these two contrasting strengths. One of them was about like the enthusiasm being really infectious, and people saying, wow, that was such an energetic talk. And the other one was about the ability to really key in and get in the zone before the talk and kind of be really focused and calm for it. I think mine was more to do with just being loud in general, and that helps me get the message across. Like just yelling a lot. So
awesome. Yeah, I was going to talk about a weakness I have. I think I suck at taking questions and answering them. It's not that I don't know the answers to those questions, but I'm not, on my feet while taking them because I'm really sort of exhausted by the end of the talk.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, but certainly anticipating questions that might come, having extra slides can really, really help so that if you are tired by the end of the talk, referring to an extra slide is just a way to kind of get you back up and also inform you about what you're going to say. So we'll talk a bit about that later. Anyone else? Somebody else? Yeah.
I think our group had consensus. Okay, tell me the names again. Amy. Andrew and I'm Lori. And I think like the passion that you were saying earlier, but also a sense of humor, which can be a fine line with slides. The sense of humor, and also some of the negatives are moving around too much, having too much content on the slides. But also the positives would be using a lot of photos, not necessarily looking at the slides a lot, but actually engaging the audience.
Yeah, humor is a really interesting one because I think any talk that we think back to that we thought was effective, it was funny at some point, but they were probably never planned jokes. I think those are the talks where I think humor is really, really effective, just where it kind of comes naturally versus a setup and then a punchline. But we're really not stand-up comedians. So that's a good point.
I agree with Scott, not to belabor this, but if you're naturally funny and it comes to you naturally and you can make it work, that's amazing. But forced comedy is so much worse than no comedy at all. Having sat through a lot of attempts at forced comedy. I mean, those are all good points, but comedy is a very tough thing to pull off.
Definitely. Anyone else want to share anything?
Maybe do one more.
Yeah. Or not, which is totally fine. Okay, so just as a bit of an outline, then. So we're going to take the next 15 minutes or so to talk about how to create dynamic slides. After that, we're going to hopefully go through a slide editing activity where some of you have brought 3 or 4 slides to modify using some of the tips that we give you, and we'll wander around and talk to you about that. After that, we'll talk about more about content and delivery, so dealing with nerves, how to, deliver clear messages. And then a lot of people were really interested in this aspect of winning talk awards, because who doesn't want to do that? So Matt is going to give some insight into how he thinks you can win a talk award. And then we'll have, a little bit of time at the end to go through questions and discussion. And we want this to be really informal. So as we're going, if you have questions that come up, or if you have insight that we're not showing up here, we're just 4 people who give talks regularly and have opinions on how to be good at that, or what to avoid. But certainly there are other opinions that we want to hear, so feel free to share those. So overall, when we sent out that survey to all of you, a lot of people are interested in organizing a dynamic presentation. And that makes a lot of sense. But it also isn't just one aspect of what we're talking about today. So you can be a really, really effective speaker, but if your slides are ugly, your presentation probably won't be perceived as dynamic. And there are ways to design slides that actually increase the flow and clarity of a presentation above and beyond how clear you are as a speaker. And so in the context of slide design itself, in terms of organizing a dynamic presentation, keep that in your mind as we go, but certainly it involves some sort of template, hopefully not that one. Some sort of font, definitely not that. And then text, but much less. And so all of these things when you're thinking about slide design are really, really important, and they really do influence how dynamic your presentation is going to be perceived. And so we're going to go through the nitty-gritty for, like I said, the next 15 minutes about actual slide design and some about content. And so templates. You've probably seen good and bad examples of slide templates, and every program that we use to create talks has built-in templates, and they're mostly awful. Clarity of message can be lost if you have background colors, if you have weird graphics or whatever. And so the four of us kind of agree that using stock templates usually is not a good idea, unless you found like this amazing, clear stock template that combines a lot of the aspects of what we're going to talk about. So we tend to generate our own templates that are very simple, white backgrounds. Some people really like black backgrounds. That can be harder on the eyes and really can change how well people see things in certain rooms. White and black is usually a better strategy. But again, this is just our opinion. Keep it simple, and then colors really matter, but don't use too many. So you don't want a lot of colors all over a template. And that's one of the reasons, if you look at a lot of the stock templates, they don't actually follow the rules of what we think make a good template, which is why we suggest not using them.
So do you have an idea of how many colors? I mean, I know how many I sort of use.
I use black and white.
Yeah, but you also,
but with a combo of photos and things like that. So in terms of colors and fonts, I'll talk about this later, but we use fonts to highlight, colors to highlight certain parts of sentences. That can be a really interesting way to guide the audience and yourself through what you're conveying. But typically on a slide, I would feel uncomfortable if they were within the overall design of the slide and template more than 2 colors. That changes if you have figures, obviously, because there are going to be colors and figures. And we can point that out. I have some example slides from the talk I'm doing here as we go. And we can critique those, because some of them use more than 2 colors. But, all of these are guidelines. And it's true also that the guidelines we're giving you apply kind of at different points in your career. That sounds weird. But you might see a plenary talk here by someone who uses Comic Sans, for instance. We're not going to say who, it doesn't matter. I will never use Comic Sans. I still don't think I could get away with it. But eventually maybe you could, and you could make it work for yourself. But mostly don't use that font. There are other things you can do, like maybe you can have more text on the slide than we're telling you because of some other aspect or where you are in your career. But as a beginning presenter, you don't want to make sort of what we would consider mistakes about using the wrong font, because it can be distracting, and then people think you don't know what you're doing. Whereas by the end of your career, people just assume you kind of know. I don't know.
Well, I think the other thing from our perspective, and again, to reiterate what Scott said, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them. But what we think we're sort of providing here is sort of a framework, a loose framework, but a framework that works. And then once you're comfortable with that, if you want to do things differently, then of course you're able to do that. But what we think we sort of put together is like a basic starting point that will get you quite far in putting together an effective presentation.
Yeah, definitely. And so along the same lines as templates, fonts really do matter. You'll notice the font that I'm using is very clean. It's no serifs. It's not funny. It's not whimsical. So typically avoid serif or whimsical fonts. Sometimes you can use them if, you're not giving a scientific presentation. There's examples of fonts you shouldn't use. The top one is Comic Sans. There's a really funny essay about Comic Sans font. But other fonts, like these ones that are a little bit complex or serif, they're just a bit harder to read. And so when you're trying to have a very clear message, usually in a diverse audience where you really want people to be able to follow, simple fonts like the 3 here on the bottom are much better to use. So just try and use non-serif fonts as much as possible. And also, this is kind of personal preference, but typically not using a default font is kind of nice because it sets your presentation apart from the majority of presentations. It's fine to use a default font, it's much easier. But if you don't want to, then try to use one of these sans serif fonts. And typically on a slide, you can have more than one font. We discourage it, but I really wouldn't have more than 2 types of font. And you might want to use a separate kind of font if you're highlighting some aspect of what you're saying. And so if you look at these slides, so here this is all one font, although I've used italics. And on the bottom, for instance, I would never do this, but you could get away with it, where the questions or bullets are actually in a different font. But you can even see there that it's just not as cohesive as the top slide. And so, 2 slides or 2 fonts per slide, but one is really best. And when you're thinking about how much text to have on a slide, the rule of thumb is 6 lines. That text, the font should be large, err on the side of large font. And it's good to use contrast colors. Another thing is to know the quality of the projectors you're working with. Here, not so great. But basically here, so there's a pretty clear definition of what hybridization is. But if you're just looking at that as an audience member and you're not familiar with the word hybridization, this is kind of laborious to go through. You might stop listening to me as I'm trying to tell you how great my research is. But when I've highlighted some of the key words in red, interbreeding, population, 2 populations, distinguishable heritable characters, if those are the only words you read from that slide, you're still going to understand what hybridization is. And it gives you something more to do as I'm talking, because you're automatically going to look at those highlighted words more than the other words. And so using contrast colors, I think, can be a really effective way to keep the audience's attention when you necessarily have to have 6 lines of text, which, avoid that as much as possible. 6 is really the max number. So another thing that you can do, and this kind of goes, we talked templates, fonts, and then organization. When you're trying to build an effective presentation, you really want to be able to walk through people something that they may not be that interested in listening to, especially by last day of a conference. We're all going to be basically brain dead, and I'm sorry if some of you are talking on the last day, but it's harder then to keep people's attention. But there are ways to do it. So instead of just saying, okay, here's my method slide, there's all this stuff, and I mean, this is a pretty clean slide, but if it comes up as is, without any context, it's not that easy to understand, potentially, and there's a lot of stuff for you to be looking at while I'm speaking, which means you're not listening to me as much as you would be if I used build-ins. And so instead, I could bring up this part of the experiment and explain, okay, here are 3 species of chickadees, here are the number of individuals we use, here's a funny little graphic I use to represent RNA-seq. I explain it slightly. Then I say, we use this to assemble a transcriptome, and you build through the various parts of the slide until you have a whole picture. But by the time we get to this whole picture, you're completely with me versus the other way. And so I think using build-ins is really effective. If you're using PowerPoint, it's easy. You can just use animations. If you're using Keynote, I would typically have separate slides for each build-in and then turn the whole thing into a PDF so that you don't have conversion errors, which are awful. I'll talk about those later. Okay, so using build-ins is a really effective way to guide the audience through more complicated slides if you necessarily have to have a lot of parts. But at the same time, it's important to not overuse images. Don't have pictures on slides just so you have a picture of the animal you're talking about. Have pictures because they matter. So you might have seen on this last slide here, there are a lot of images. The images have all been modified in a way that I think is effective by just deleting the background so that it just looks cleaner and nice. There's a tool in Keynote to do this called Instant Alpha. If you're good at Photoshop, you can do it with Photoshop. But all of these pictures are there for a reason. So the gene ID, why is there a zebrafinch there? It's because we use the zebrafinch genome in that context. Why are there chickadees there? Well, because I work on chickadees. But none of these images are there just because I wanted there to be a picture of a bird or whatever. So it's important to use images effectively, but don't just have them there for no reason. And when you use them, make sure that they have consistent formatting. So if you use, you have one of those biodiversity slides perhaps, and all of the pictures are different sizes of squares, why not just take the extra time to make them all match? It actually makes a difference in terms of how that slide is perceived by everyone that's looking at it. Don't have different kinds of borders or different kinds of finishes. Never use drop shadows, please, ever. I do not know why that is a default in almost everything now, but drop shadows are awful. But if you really want to use drop shadows, then drop shadow all your photos, otherwise someone's going to notice the inconsistency. So make sure that you're consistent with formatting. And it is really nice if you're going to go the route of a white background or black background to have photos that just sit on the background. And then you can use this instant alpha in Keynote, and I think PowerPoint has an option to just delete backgrounds as well. And really, it's true that layout matters always. So regardless of whether it's a method slide or you're just doing an introduction, you really want to think about how you're placing photos on the slide background. There's no point in having a photo almost in the corner. It would look just as nice right in the corner. So really think about the overall visuals that you're presenting and keep them consistent throughout. Never. Okay. You can maybe get away with a gimmicky transition if you're giving like a public talk, but even then, they just don't usually work, especially the ones that blow in from the side or blow up or whatever. Just don't use them. I don't even know why they really exist. Certainly in a scientific context, it never gives you credibility to have fly-ins, and so just don't use them.
I have one thought on that too.
or do that.
The spinny one's cool. No,
Pinwheel's fine.
So for the lightning talks, is anyone giving a lightning talk in here in this session? Okay. So I was thinking about this for the transitions because it's soft advancing, right? And I thought that it would be good to have like a fade in between the slides rather than a hard transition. I don't know if you guys have already.
That was my thought as well.
Yeah,
So I would say something like an easy dissolve works. That's what it's called in Keynote, where it's just a brief fade from one to the next. And I think, to me, all you've done is you've softened the transition. You haven't done that. Doesn't count as a gimmicky transition.
Okay.
I mean, a gimmicky transition. We all know what we're talking about. It's ones that spin in, that explode. There used to be one in Keynote where it was like a fireball would come through.
You could change the fireball's color.
Yeah, don't.
To match your template. Yeah, just don't use those. So the fades and things like that, if it's an auto-advancing talk and you're nowhere near your computer, that is nice because it helps you see when the slide is changing, but also gives your audience a sense of progression of the talk. If you're consistently running back to your computer to press a button and then it's like every time you press a button, that's not really smooth. It's distracting. So I can understand, in the context of a self-advancing talk, where transitions might be more important. In terms of presenting data, has anyone ever heard of this statement evidence approach? So the statement evidence approach is, I'll explain it here. So basically, here's a slide that I'll be showing on Thursday about chickadees. There's a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of stuff. And I recognize that if I just put this up, probably no one here cares. Well, no, there's like one or two. But
I definitely care.
Yeah, there's like three. At any rate, this is a lot of information. And where's the main message, really? Should I be looking at the oxidative phosphorylation pathway, blah, blah, blah. But if you use statement evidence and a built-in, it becomes much clearer. So here, in my talk, I will have already told you what these colors mean for these chickadee comparisons, so you'll be familiar with that. You'll see that there's a statement where I've used highlighting to tell you that the oxidative phosphorylation pathway is really important and it happens to be enriched for fixed sequence differences. Then I show you the pathway, then I show you where those differences are. So rather than, this is a combination of what I talked about in terms of using built-ins, but also here's the statement of what's coming. You're not going to have to guess about my results. It's not a question. I really discourage people from using questions within presentations of results because you know the answer. You don't need to get your audience to guess. Just tell them. I like that about titles as well, both of papers and talks. So here's the statement, and here's the evidence. And you can do this throughout results sections. I think it's really, really effective, and it's a way of presenting results that I think is getting more common. So statement, evidence. And then, I'm running out of time, but never, ever say, I know you can't see this, but. Are you kidding me? You're giving a presentation, a visual presentation. There should be nothing on that slide that is not, and I don't care if it's a phylogeny or a table where there's really important values. There is always a way to make that visually appealing to an audience. And you should always try to do that. So please never in your lives, don't know. I've said this before. I mean, as a starting graduate student, it's like, oh, whatever, this big FST table matters. No, it doesn't matter. So never have to say, I know you can't see this, but really don't be afraid to recreate figures for a talk. R produces nice figures. You can make better ones. You can make better ones by blowing up the size of the font on the axes. You can add colors. For talks, honestly, yeah, you can recreate figures to make them look better and make them look consistent. So even if you're using figures from papers, where you want to say, here's a result someone got in 86, and here's a result I got in 2016, make those look the same so that they're easier for the audience to compare and there's visual continuity throughout your talk.
Yeah, I have one additional thought. I think I can only think of very few rare instances where like a table with things that big.
Yeah, I mean, I have a table in the talk I'm doing here, but it's huge, and there are very few numbers in it, and it's just as an organizational tool. But honestly, if there's, over a certain number of columns and rows, it's not important enough to have it on a slide.
But I've definitely had talks where I've just like pasted in tables and just like circled the important value, and I definitely think it's good.
Or like, even if you have a phylogeny, I'm sorry for all like the evolutionary biology references, but that's how I think. And the tips have labels, there's ways to do color coding that's much better and so on. So always try and modify figures so that they make sense. Yeah?
So if we're modifying a figure taken from somewhere else, we just cite it as adapted from?
Yeah, modified from, and then have the citation. Exactly. That's typically totally fine. If you want to have your Twitter handle in your talk, don't put it at the end. Put it on your title slide so that people watching your talk can tweet about it, right? I've just seen that as we start to use Twitter more, it's often like in our acknowledgement section. That doesn't make sense to me.
Why not both?
Or you can have both, yeah, to remind people, but definitely have it at the beginning if you really want people to use Twitter and talk about what you're doing.
There's also something for this conference that if you don't want your talk tweeted, you're supposed to put a picture of the Twitter logo with a cross through it at the very beginning if you don't want somebody to.
Yeah, and that's across most conferences now. If you really don't want people tweeting your sensitive results, then you just say no to Twitter. Okay, and then I have one last thing, and this is a personal preference that I wanted to include. Sometimes you can get away with it, but this isn't that useful. I put a bird because we're at a bird conference, and if you have this, that's fine. But it doesn't provide much to your audience. So say you've gone through your acknowledgments, and then does anyone have any questions? And it's cute because it's a bird singing. But it's not helping your audience remember what you just talked about. And most of the times we're going through some mental fatigue at these conferences. Like, it's already starting for me. And so I think it's a little bit more effective if you want to have a question slide. Well, just don't do it. Or I typically build through a results summary before I get to my acknowledgments. So this would have come up as 3 points. Then I get to my acknowledgments, say whatever I need to say, and then I just leave this up for the questioning period. It's a way for the audience to remember the main points of my talk. It's a way for me to remember the main points of my talk, and it's visually kind of pleasing. And here you'll also see that I chose images to go with each of the bullets. Again, it's just a way to refer people back to what I was saying. So I think this is maybe a more effective way to end the talk than with the question slide, although it's cute the other way. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to talk about in terms of slide layout. There's other things that you can think about, but overall I think if you combine this kind of framework, you can make a dynamic presentation both from a visual perspective, and then we'll talk more about how to do it from a delivery perspective in a little bit. But really, really don't underestimate how important slide design is. I mean, I get harped on, or was harped on in my old lab because I was like, oh, that font's a different color. But now I'm not there anymore, and they're still doing that, so that's good to know. Anyways, okay, so what we're going to do now, then I went a little bit over, but for the next 20 or so minutes, we'd like you to split up into groups, maybe the same groups that you talked in, or different groups, and who all brought slides, actually? You'll have to...
Raise your hands a little higher, please. 9. Okay. Why don't we have the people that brought slides go to different parts of the room? Is that a good idea?
Yeah.
We're kind of making this up as we go. So, yeah, why don't we have people that have slides form their own little pod with, like, how many people are we? Maybe, like, 2 people per person. We have about 25 people in here, 9 people with slides. So let's do one person with slides, 2 people without slides. Form little groups. We'll have about 9 groups. And so we're going to, how long are we spending on this?
About 15 minutes, 20 minutes.
15, 20 minutes. So what's our idea?
The idea is to look at your slides and think about what we just told you. So for the persons whose slides they are, constructive criticism, right? You did the questions thing. Go through, look at the font, think about overall layout, think about how you've used photos, whether you could use photos more effectively. If you have enough slides to show like presentation of results, think about whether that's as clear as it could be. Especially if there are people in your group who are not familiar with your research field, you could show them that section and say, does this message make sense, or are there ways to fix it? And so we'll wander around as you guys are doing that. Is that clear? Does anyone have questions? Great. So if you have slides, put up your hand and just wander somewhere, and then
put up your hand and go find a place in the room. If you have slides.
Keep your hand up until you have people.
So you have a pause. Is that what? Pause. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hers would be so everything is like.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, I know.
A lot of people Brian. It's all we know. And there's someone has sort of formalized this as like a principle.
I have mine. I only have my Twitter.
Yeah, that's true.
The only other, like, I've been told to put my email up because supposedly people like to email questions.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I guess
They can do that through your
it'd be very, it'd be easy to do. Maybe I'll do that.
If anyone has questions, feel free to ask us too.
It's enough going on, especially with, stuff going on.
I have on my it's like the background is something interesting. I think I study right now. It's like a different background.
That's how mine is. It's a full screen picture of my studies.
Necessarily studies in this design. I don't know if
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of pictures of it. If you know what my study is, you might get
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary.
especially at an art club.
Yeah, but you spend so little time actually looking at the title side, like after it's up for like a split second, so I introduce you and you're on.
What you're presenting.
I think most of the I don't think it's necessary. I think it's not. They're there the whole time.
No, they're there the whole time. Oh, yeah. So, like, this is your way to talk about it, right? So it's and then I also
Yeah, it does like
and then I also make sure that the citations
where it's like intro, like it's like I don't like
Oh, yeah.
unfooling, and I don't like it. It depends. It's kind of distracting. At the bottom is like
Something about that's like the
maybe like a seminar or something.
Yeah,
Where you can lose track of where you are. Yeah.
Questions?
I've also been
That was good. Oh, well.
nice to have that initiative. That's a word that isn't necessarily writing information for the audience. And so, like, my friends are having to change all of my titles to be what I'm trying to say. So, like, for results slides, so saying results, it says that's our results slides.
It's good to have a description.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, even in my background, sometimes I don't even use it's like it's just about me talking. And guys, they don't need it. Like, for example, on this slide, it said that at the top, like, you could just say what was. Like, in one line. Yeah, it could be like 3 words. Either way, I think it's fine.
Yeah, it's tough too because I'll have several students underneath the background.
Another thing is that your team is somewhat because it's like at an angle, so you can only really write if you have a box. So that can be, I think that can be a positive. It can be a positive because you can read and like get like that. Yeah, right. I mean, when you have a lot of space, you tendency to write like several lines. And I'm really good at that.
I included 3 of them, they're all really basically the same slide. So what I was doing is I'm talking about this course on inquiry, I want to highlight people why. So I do that animating and have what it was, talk about the way things were from back to the PCI. I was having to do the slide, like animation by doing the slide. Yeah. And then I also learned how. Yeah, now you have to learn it.
This slide, what I would do we'll figure out take in the whole page and use that one space for this text. And then that way, they're going to be able to see that a lot more. Like, you already, the white space is built in. Once it's enlarged, you should be able to paste that.
I'm showing you
That would help.
these numbers can be pretty small.
And the contrast might not be that great. Well, that won't matter. I'm just, you have the white space there. And I think it would be nice to utilize.
And I'm trying to use, and this is a good too. I mean, like, this design and so like the pages and stuff, kind of like really limits you. But I've also been honest, like, you want to have like that scene or short. And it can be very good and very effective. But we had a class talk where she came over. I was making my always I got that four slides all about ice cream professionals. So I really used to go out on. And I like it, but it does really
Yeah, I mean, if you're really sold on speaking, I would say, but again, recognizing that you can reduce all of your picture shots into pieces. So at this point, I don't know, like, for me, as a viewer, I'm more interested in what's going on here than the theme and all the text. Like, if I can get you more of the data and less of
I think what I would say is that while your point is good, that you don't want to change it for but if you change like 1 or 2 words that are really important, something you really want, and just make it really narrow. So you want to do that. That's going to make it obvious to the audience.
discussing whether or not that would be better if this figure were enlarged and then shown how it animates.
Do it again?
I'm talking about the differences. And it's just whether or not, is this just too small or should I make it very up? But I've got like this scene, like I don't know if you can see over here, like this scene, like background, right here, but it also illuminates the size of my figure. That's going to make it hard for the audience to see. Also, kind of direct my characters in this there.
Yeah.
I wonder what we're doing these ones, so these ones, so it's like
Maybe, but I still think if you were to get rid of the TV and just go to a wide screen, you would utilize all that space.
Yeah, I don't think you want to be constrained by
I think it's cool. It's just the angles of it. You know what I mean? It's limiting you because you don't want text to overlap.
Yeah, I mean, it comes off as a little too much to take in, and so I think it distracts from what you actually wanted people to focus on, even if it's consistent. I would just keep it simple. Have it. I mean, what's not boring? It's just effective. And then you can make it bigger, and then you can have people focus in on what you're saying. Some of these rooms are super tiny. I don't know if you've been in all of them, but like the screen is a quarter of this one. So even if you have blown up fonts,
another thing you might want to mention is you have right that these screens are 16 aspect ratio. Like that's going to be cut off.
Oh yeah, we should really mention that.
Because look how like it's a widescreen format.
We should remind people the 16:9. Not everybody is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody mentioned that.
It was.
It's in so they sent out emails and posted on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
They had PDF links to PDFs about the different presentation formats.
Okay.
And in the top one it says
But
16 by 9. Although I do
nobody
think
would be
they
looking
could,
for that.
Right, no,
because it's not. But they said it wouldn't be a problem, but I don't know.
I
Because it seems like everything
you'll
would be
probably
shrunk
just
in the middle.
scale it and you have white space on either side.
I think so.
Yeah. If your background is white already, you'll be totally fine. It might look a little squished, but if your background is not white, I think what will happen is we'll project a white sort of border or a black border around. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
We can probably figure this out right now. I can just make a new one that's not.
If it like makes it look weird, that might be.
Yeah, because like I agree with
So that's what it'll look like.
That's standard.
So it'll just not project wide. Okay, it just won't take up all the space.
So that's a standard. What time is it? It's kind of 9:19. Yeah, that's fine. What if you are not 16? Yeah, so a lot of
we just never we just never knew teaching.
1 or 2 minutes.
I don't understand.
1 or 2 more minutes and we're going to move on.
I think it's just for everyone to see so like that. So yeah, and I think you can have these just playing on. So you have like this very yeah, we knew we knew ahead of time. I think that there was
How do you guys feel about it going? That's like the biggest question I have.
What did they say?
My therapist wants me to stick to it so that people have a chance to read it.
That's really the main thing that people do. Do I know any of those people?
Yeah, so I've been writing it like right off of this. She's using her phone, but I also make sure I put letters all the way.
I think maybe it is just like
Maybe I just need to get a picture.
I think it helps too. That's everything you know. Like you're like John, I'm back and this.
One thing that it seems kind of awkward to do my results or include and do my thing include again. It's just right.
We're 1 minute.
So you can flip to that.
I would. I'm a little bit over.
Maybe that's.
But no, yeah. I think sometimes it's just forget to say, thank you for the question now. By having that, it's kind of like the notification happen.
Yeah.
And thumb
Well, that might have been the reason. When we showed up, I was expecting to be there.
Well, we're going to move on to talking about delivery. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. We're going to move on to talking about delivery. So once you wrap up your conversations, we're going to have you guys come back up to the front half of the room.
And one thing while we're doing that, I just want to mention, so
Thanks for sharing.
if you guys haven't seen, the projectors at the conference are projecting in 16:9. If you've made your presentation in 16:9, great. If not, you don't want to change it, this is what it will look like. So this is a standard 4:3 ratio. If you have a black background, no one will notice except for, there's some empty space. No, if
I know, you'll have a square.
Right.
Did everyone hear that? So everything in this conference is projected in 16:9, which is not, that's widescreen format. It's not, this is normal format 4:3. So if you've made your talk in 4:3, this is how it will look on all of the screens. Whereas the slides that I was showing you before, those are all 16:9 slides. And so they fill the whole screen. It's fine. Reformatting the talk for 16:9 is really not.
It's kind of a pain.
It's kind of a pain. Forgot I was going to do this. Sit down now. Okay, so you guys are.
Yeah, can you open up our PowerPoint? Yeah, and just one kind of thought about, thinking about logistics and talks, I think it's always a really good idea to try to look at the room wherever you're presenting before you present, to get a sense of like what the projection setup is like, understand the environment, know kind of where the possible distractions are going to be. I think it's a good idea to try to prepare yourself as much in terms of like where things will take place beforehand.
The good news is that all of these rooms are basically look like this.
These are all the same?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Because at some conferences, there's a lot of heterogeneity.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so in this next part, Sarah and I are going to take turns talking about some different aspects of talk delivery. And in seeing Scott's talk about slide formatting, I wouldn't use these as perfect examples of how to format your slides, because we kind of put this together last minute, but we're going to focus on the delivery aspect. Right?
Also, don't do that.
Yeah. Do as we say, not as we do.
I was going to point out too, I mentioned it to somebody else, that there's actually a gray box around the titles, and you can't see it. So make sure that you take a look at how your slides are actually going to project.
really
before
faint,
you start.
and it's almost kind of like weirdly
Yeah.
distracting.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to focus on these 6 points. And again, just want to reemphasize that these are our thoughts as people who have given a decent number of presentations. Every person is different, right? And so, you need to know yourself as a presenter in order to maximize your effectiveness as a presenter. So first off, we're going to start about what you say. And really, presentations are a story, right? And the idea is that you're an actor on the stage. So, invoke your inner Michael Scott. Maybe not too much, right? But you want to present your work in a way that is engaging. And so if we think about an arc of a storyline, there's an introduction, there's maybe a meaty core, there's a possible wrap-up, or maybe even a climax, or an exciting moment, and then maybe the epilogue, right? And so in science, we often use manuscripts as kind of our model for how we think about the progression of different aspects of presenting science. And I think this is effective for talks as well, right? We can think about how we introduce our work, how we present our methods and results, how we discuss them, etc. But I want to reemphasize that this is a presentation, right? And so, you may be someone who is more quiet or shy, reticent person. But if you're an actor, you can be someone different. You can have the ability to engage your audience and really, engage it as kind of a performance art in a way. I would encourage you to think about that.
And I think it's really important at this point, just to really think about placing what you're talking about into context. Don't assume that the audience knows the context of your research, because that's a really easy way to lose them. And if you don't place, this is going to be particularly important later when we talk about talk awards, if your results are not set up in some broad context and placed into a larger framework, they're much less interesting, and it's very unlikely that you would get an award for presenting a full story. So when you're thinking about this narrative arc, it's not just, I started my PhD, I found this result, here it is. It's, here's the reason that the study is even happening, here's the broader context into which my results fit. That's very, very important, and we should think about it here, not later on.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. That's a really good point. And know your audience too, right? So I've made the mistake where I presented the same talk at AOU as I did at Evolution. And they're different audiences, and they have different standing levels of expertise in these different fields. If you present at like ABS or something, and then at AOU, those are two different audiences. So think critically about who you're talking to, their standing level of knowledge, and how to best present your work. So yeah, introductions are really important, and thinking about your first slide, that's often when you're the most nervous, right? When you're like, oh God, I have to get up there and talk now in front of other people. So thinking about exactly how you're going to start, I find, can help me get the ball rolling. So thinking about your introduction, I think it's good to introduce yourself and your institution, especially if you're at an earlier career stage. Helps you get your name out there. There's kind of the standard. Today I'll be talking about this, and I think someone else put that bell in there. But
It's one way to do it, but there are others.
Yeah, so there are lots of ways that you can start this, but I would just...
Session chair is the one who's going to say it, so if you just repeat the title that they just read.
Yeah, that's ineffective, right? So yeah, if you just are reading your title, that might not be good, but I would encourage you to think about introducing yourself and where you're coming from. There's some obvious things about facing your audience, but being aware of a room, right? So like not trying to only talk to these people, but also facing these people, making eye contact with people in the room. Maybe not making eye contact with the person that's sleeping, because that might throw you off. But work your way across the room. Try to engage the entire audience. And it's sometimes hard, just given the logistics of some rooms. It might be weird. But if I'm like talking to you over here, or that's not weird. I'm talking to you just looking at the screen. That's not particularly effective.
But in a room like this, you can imagine, okay, so the podium is here. You might be really nervous and just be like talking like this or something. That would not be the greatest idea. But if you actually want to point things out in your slide, it's totally fine to walk across the room nonchalantly, talking to the audience. You get over there, you point at something, you walk back. It's a little more engaging than just standing at the podium. You're going to be all over the room, but not in a crazy way. And then you don't have to use this, all nervous, crazy person, and try to point at stuff. Honestly, almost no one is effective at using this. picture. So it's totally fine to wander over to the screen and then back. The way that Nick's saying about like sort of working your way across the room.
Don't use a laser pointer unless you're an expert, and you're probably not an expert. Just distracting. It's distracting.
And all the rooms are set up
We're all
like this, where you
cats.
can just walk over to it and look out things too. It's really not necessary
Yeah.
at this point.
We've actually kind of already talked about this, but just in terms of the introduction, you want to engage your audience and draw interest to your work, right? And we often talk about a funnel, thinking about the broad context that Scott emphasized, funneling into the specifics of your study. It might be a misstep to say, start off your presentation like, I don't know, I'm going to talk about blueberries, and then just go right into it or something like that.
That's a definite misstep.
Why should the audience care that you're talking about blueberries? What about blueberries is interesting? Something like that. I'm not sure what you guys think about citations in studies. I think maybe if you're at an earlier career stage like myself, that might be a good idea, but I think they can also be distracting. I think that's a topic for a conversation.
Yeah, I think that they should be used effectively. Having no citations makes no sense because somebody did the work you're referring to. Having like 10 citations looks bad. So choose, 1 or 2 to show that you know the literature, that you show where you're getting your ideas from, and make sure that it's formatted nicely, and then go from there. But I think regardless of career stage, it's important to have citations because we all rely on other people in science. So
Yeah.
that's just my opinion. Yeah.
How do you feel about, how would you go about citing a picture, for example, that you maybe pulled from the internet from something that doesn't belong to you?
So, honestly, what we'll do in my talk.
Yeah, sure.
So the question was, how would you go about citing pictures that you might have pulled from the internet that you didn't take? What I do, I'm not saying it's the only way. We can ask other people. I used to not say anything. Then I sort of felt badly for that. So now, what I'll do in my talk on Thursday is, and I do the same thing with like scientific citations. I include them, but they're small and they're in a way in which I find them to be not distracting. So for crediting images, I literally write images stolen from internet.
If you know who took the photo, you can acknowledge them. Under the photo, if you really want, if you have a lot of those on a lot of photos, it can make the format look weird. So sometimes I include that at the end of the talk, say like photos from blah blah blah. But if there's a way to make it not distracting, you can include it on the slides.
And I do something different. So for the talk I'm giving here, I took a lot of photos from one of my collaborators, and I know how photography is super important to him. He works really hard at it, so I acknowledge him on every photo. It's very small, and it's just his first initial and last name. But I don't think it's distracting, but on every slide that I use one of his photos, I acknowledge that. So that's an art.
It seems like photos in particular merit Reddit more so than maybe like clip art, like this funnel.
But I think regardless of how you do it, the message that we're all giving is to try to find a way that you feel comfortable with that acknowledges that contribution without being distracting, right? Because the main point of the slide is not the credit to the photographer or to the source, right? The main point is whatever you're trying to make.
And certainly don't ever put a web address. I've seen a lot of places where there's like a web address in white font stuck on the photo, and it's like, why did you even use the photo? Because that all looks like garbage. Right? It does.
So citing like literature, is there a standard format you would suggest using? Like, is author date enough? Do you have to include the journal name?
It depends. So I think author and date is enough.
The question was, is there a standard format for citing like other literature? Author, date, journal, whatever it is.
I think so. If it's just you're citing someone else's work, if you really want people to know that that work was well received and it was in science, then you can include that in italics afterwards. I don't think it's really necessary when you're generally citing other people's work, but when you're eventually working on like your job talk, for instance, and you're citing yourself, and the paper was in a good place, then you definitely include it. Even though that seems a little like humble braggy, it's unfortunately important. Yeah.
You said that you had a friend whose photos you use in the credit form. Do you like link to their website, maybe in like the acknowledgements or something?
I don't. But
Did
he's
everyone hear the
also,
question? Sorry.
sorry.
I just want to make sure that everyone heard the question. Okay.
I was asking about photos, and if there's somebody whose photos you're regularly using and perhaps have a web page and it looks like photography, should you
considered using the Twitter handle of artists who have provided illustrations for my work. That's like, you'll be talking about Twitter if you're sticking around after this. And it's a really effective way to get press for somebody if they're an artist or a photographer. So that could be one strategy. Just because it's unlikely, I think, if there was a website there that anyone would take the time to write it down. But Twitter is just easy, so that could be good if you really wanted to.
Okay, we're not going to get through all this stuff. That's okay.
Just keep going.
We've actually already talked about this, but if you're presenting your methods, I encourage you to be light on technical details. There's a reason why we're all, they can come talk to you afterwards if they really want to know the specific aspects, or maybe they'll ask you a question about it. Be prepared for that, but I wouldn't necessarily spend a lot of time focusing on all the technological aspects. We've already talked about some of this other stuff. But if you don't need a figure in there, if you don't need both panels, don't include both panels. All right, so thinking about the end, I encourage you to try to end on a strong note. I've seen some talks and they're like, and that's all I got. And then they're like, okay, all right, hey. And they're going to clap for you regardless, but think about trying to end on a strong note, thanking the audience. It'll help you, feel confident for that question session, and it'll kind of bring some closure to the topic.
And I think this is one place where if you have like a built-in summary at the end, it's much less likely that you're going to be like, and that's all I have, because you can just re-summarize what you've been said and then stop talking. Yeah, certainly ending, that's all I have. It's a product of nerves, I think, and poor talk design.
Ending is actually really hard. So it pays dividends to think about how you're going to end your talk and figure out a way that you are comfortable with.
You guys have examples of hybrid?
I've often used the one on the bottom, but Sarah doesn't
actually do that too.
So.
Which one? It just seems so awkward.
I know, Sarah doesn't like it, and she's
It's
a
pretty
presentation award winner, so you should listen to her.
Got a question?
Yeah. Usually I end on an acknowledgement slide, but I don't really like doing that. Is there another place where I can put the acknowledgement slides that you guys can put on?
Yeah, so the question was, usually I end on an acknowledgement slide, but that's kind of boring, don't want to do that. Is there another way to do that? So what I typically do is I build a summary slide. So here's the 3 main take-home points of my talk. Here's my acknowledgement slide. I acknowledge really important people. I don't say all the names because nobody cares. Maybe acknowledge funding. And then I leave it on the fully built summary slide. That's my last slide. So I click to that and say, and with that, here's a summary. And then,
I think that last one's fine.
well, that's fine, but at any rate, so I end on that fully built summary slide rather than in the acknowledgments because the audience can refer to what I talked about. But that's just my strategy.
Yeah.
My advisor used to have a different strategy where he'd move from the title slide directly to the acknowledgement slide. He'd start with these are the people who helped make this project possible. The first couple of times it seemed a little weird because you start and you're ending the talk immediately, but then you get to finish your results and then end with your summary. So there are no awkward transitions then, and you can. I tried it a few times and it actually gets better for that.
Yeah, I use that too. I like that strategy, partially because it puts your acknowledgments up front. It acknowledges that you have collaborators and co-authors that are really instrumental to the project, rather than maybe like an afterthought, like, oh, here's my acknowledgments.
Yeah, I think that can be really effective. I think sometimes it's more effective in a longer talk. So if you're giving a seminar, an hour-long seminar, I like having the acknowledgments. I do that first as well. But in a 15-minute talk, I guess, if you're trying to pare down time, then that's when I put it at the end. But I've seen it work really nicely.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way when I give a seminar where I'm the sole author, then I'll acknowledge at the beginning. But if it's a talk at a meeting and there's lots of co-authors, I usually mention their names at the beginning for sure. Okay, so we had a lot of stuff.
We wanted like 2.5 hours to do all this, but
yeah, so this stuff is really more about your speech, and I think it's mostly intuitive, so we can kind of move through it quickly. I think it's really important, these two first points. You want to talk really slowly and deliberately. You want your audience to be able to follow what you're saying, and you want to stop and pause at these points that you really want to emphasize. So when questions or hypotheses, you don't want to zip through those. You want to make sure that you emphasize, okay, if you missed all of the introductory stuff, this is what I'm doing. And at the end, too, your takeaway, which should be on your last slide, the one thing, if they didn't listen to the whole thing, they were on their email or whatever, that's the one thing you want them to remember. And so the best way to be able to talk slowly is if you just make sure that you don't put too much in. And so that's why it's really important to practice and rehearse, because here, I don't know if you know this, but at 12 minutes, there's a bird that's going to tweet. I forget, I think it's a red star at 12 minutes, 13. Does anybody know? Yeah, I'm
at
not.
15, is it going to be like a barn owl screaming? Or what?
So I think at 13, it's the black-headed blue warbler, which is the bird I studied for my dissertation. And then I think it's some kind of awful. What is it?
Yellow-headed blackbird.
Oh, that makes sense. That's obnoxious. Yeah. So you want to make sure that you talk slowly but cover less material, but don't go over because you're going to have that going on, and that's really distracting.
And pauses are going to feel infinitely long to you and not to the audience. If you're not talking for 20 seconds, it's really not going to matter to the audience, but you're going to feel like, oh my god, what the hell, this is weird. But it's actually slow it down, and it's not as weird to pause as you think.
Yeah. So this next point, so we've all listened to recordings of ourselves and are kind of embarrassed to hear it, but I think it's good to do that. But one of the things is if you're a monotone speaker, especially if you have a really overly rehearsed talk, you just want to pay attention. Like when you're giving your introduction, you're more conversational, you're talking to the audience, you're introducing yourself, you go through your background, you have a more informative tone, you're talking about facts. Hopefully when you get to your results, you're excited, you're moving around a little bit more, so just pay attention to that. Up top, I think a lot of us do this, especially when we're not feeling very confident. It's really awkward. It goes up, it's the sound of making a question at every statement you have goes up. So it's good to listen to yourself actually to notice those things. And certainly when you practice it, you probably aren't doing that, but in front of a group that happens. The shouting thing, so I've definitely had this happen to you where you're in a talk and if there's a microphone, there's no reason to raise your voice more than you need to. If you feel like you're straining your voice, you're probably shouting, and it's awkward, and you're out of breath, and just don't do it. The filler words, I've been saying whatever. But if you know what you want to say in your talk and you've rehearsed it, then that doesn't happen. Because I've had people come up to me afterwards, like, how do you not say that? But you can hear in my regular speech I do all the time, but not in the talk. So that just comes from knowing exactly what you want to say.
Yeah. And really for all of this, is this what I really sound like? Get yourself recorded. Get someone to record you giving a talk. It's the only way you're going to, it's horrible. I sound way bigger than I think. But if you're giving a talk, the only way for you to know if you're saying or if you're pausing long enough, or if you're doing weird hand gestures, is actually to watch yourself. And it'll be one of the most painful things you do, but also one of the best things to do. I had to do this when I worked as a naturalist, and it was very, very informative. And I do not in talks ever, because I know and have taught myself to avoid that. And the only way you're gonna know if you're up talking is to hear yourself up talking. Even if someone says you are, you'll say, no, I wasn't. You can't say no to a video, so report yourself.
And when I up talk, I know I'm doing it, and it's really distracting to myself. Why did I do that?
For so many reasons, a short pause is way better than saying or It's hard to do, but if you can practice, you will get better.
Yeah, if you lose your train of thought, just take a moment, let yourself pause, repeat, and nobody's gonna notice. It's always gonna seem longer than the microphone thing. So, yeah, when people are talking like this and this way, you use that. So avoid the fade. Don't talk like this right into the microphone. You don't even need a microphone user, so just don't use it. Move it out of the way. But if you were ever in a room that you need it, and like mid comes up, and there's a person that's really tall, like take the time to adjust it. This is your space. Everybody's here to listen to you, so don't be afraid to mess with the equipment as needed. The next point, know your nervous and anxious self. So everybody has their own thing. If you get dry mouth, just bring water up there. you know, so you don't want to get to a point where you're muddling through these hard to speak words or phrases, and just make sure when you practice really slowly, because you're undoubtedly going to talk much faster when you're up in front of a group, so you get those trouble words and nobody understands what you're saying.
Does anyone have an issue with grammar? Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, I just want to add a comment. One thing that I do is that I ask my audience to take care of me.
Oh, yeah.
So I know if I have to use the microphone or not.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to do.
I will say, if you ask that, you should definitely. I feel like people ask that, they're expecting that they're going to hear, yeah, it's fine,
So
because they're trying to get out of using the microphone. So just make sure that you pay attention, because I don't know. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. If they say no, use the microphone, even though it feels awkward. And definitely don't look at your slides back to the mic, because it's frustrating. But yeah, does anyone get drown out? Because there's a good strategy to deal with it.
What is it?
What is drown out?
No, what's the strategy?
Oh, so I'm going to tell you once I know if it matters for people. Basically, it matters. So if you get dry mouth, right before you speak, just eat an orange slice, and it will actually keep your throat damp for the whole talk. I know that sounds weird, but you just stuck in an orange slice before it now. Don't forget, like some of my friends, and then have an orange slice in your hand that you're slowly squeezing to death while you're giving your talk. That's like a crazy person. Just eat an orange slice, and then you talk. I promise you won't get dry mouth.
I wish I had known that years ago.
Oh, there you go.
I was at an evolution meeting, and Brett Pesura was in the audience. I don't know if you guys know who Brett was, but I was like referencing him in my talk, and I was so nervous beforehand that I was drinking all this water, and then during my talk, all I had to do was go pee. It was horrible.
Yeah.
We're not going to get through all this.
No, we're not.
By any means. Should we maybe?
So I would say, like, what of those remaining topics where people most want to hear about?
Yeah. So in terms of how you look, how you prepare, how to deal with the unexpected, how to deal with nerves. Who votes for number 3? Number 4. We got two brave voters. All right. Number 5. Okay, let's do that.
What was that? Not even number 6.
Well, that was like the majority. So.
We can also send these around too.
Yeah, we'll send you guys some PowerPoints so see how it goes.
And we do have time at the end for questions, and so if we want to return to something at the very end, we might have.
Do you want to do your? I know we're like basically running out of time.
Well, my part will be fast. So run through this fast, and then we'll run through the end.
Okay. I mean, with this, you really just have to be prepared for anything in your talk, and it's just something that you kind of have to work with in terms of how you deal with distractions, right? So there will be interruptions with your talk. If you prepare your talk and you go into the mindset that there will be distractions and there will be interruptions, it can help you kind of get beyond that and move through it. But you might have technical glitches. There was one time where pointers might not work, or
The power goes out.
yeah, Scott had the power go out on one of his talks
I
recently.
still want to talk a word. So, it's really about being comfortable with your talk. So all of these unexpected things, they're only going to really shake you up if you are not prepared in the general sense. So whether it's rehearsing your talk or just being familiar with each slide, if you make sure that you're comfortable with that, then technical glitches or interruptions will really throw you off much less than if you're like sticking to a script sort of thing.
How many of you are giving lightning talks? Yes, the auto advancing slide bit. So I would just say, as advice, having done this last year, is to just know your talk so that if you're not looking at the screen and it turns, like it's not going to distract you, you can just continue. Because if you get just slightly off, then and you're like waiting for it to turn or it's already turned, you don't want your audience to be like, they're off. If you can just talk to the audience, talk through it, it'll be more comfortable for the audience and yourself.
This is a big one.
Yeah.
When you look out in the audience and you see someone on their phone or asleep, it does not make you feel very good, but it happens to everyone. So you should just expect it. And just don't look at them. There's going to be some like really happy nodding person. Just focus on them. I have some friends that you can pick them out at the back of the room because they're all just like, yeah. Whereas I'm usually like, this is how I think. But anyways, so
When we were grad students, we used to do that on purpose. We would ask other grad students to come to our talks and be, like engaged audience members. So you would have someone to look at that you knew was, on your side.
Not the person who came.
think everyone at these meetings is on our side, right? They all want us to give good talks. So I think it's really easy to get on your own head, no God, no judgment. But really, everyone wants it honest.
Yeah, and they care about what you're saying, not about you, right? So they're there to hear about your work. So focus on that. It's your message.
Okay, the last bit in this is dealing with questions, and I think this is actually maybe a good thing to end on before we go to.
We'll hit a little bit more of that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Maybe we'll just briefly talk about it. So I mean, as you requested, sorry, I can't remember your name, but Lori, yeah. So repeating or paraphrasing the question. Paraphrasing, I think, is actually a really good idea because it makes you kind of digest a question, boil it down to its quintessential essence, and it also buys you a little bit of time to think about how to answer it, right? So I know that I get nervous. I'm like, oh God, what the hell are these people going to ask me? But if you have a little bit of time and you're repeating it, maybe you can multitask and also think about how to formulate that response. And it's okay, maybe you guys can help here, but it's okay to not know the answer. Not everyone knows the answer. You might get a really tough question. But how you deal with that, you don't have to just like clam up and say, oh, I don't know. I mean, you can say like, that's a really interesting point. We can talk about that maybe during the next coffee break or something. And you might get occasionally like an aggressive person who disagrees, especially if you're giving some kind of contentious talk. Try not to let it bother you, I guess.
I think, it's okay not to know the answer, but it's not okay to say I don't know and leave it at that. It's fine to say I don't know, but here's all this other knowledge that I have that relates to what I've been talking about. Maybe this relates to what you're talking about. But don't just end it in saying like I don't know. Because then you lose points if you're being judged because you need to show some ability to answer questions. But it also just makes the audience feel like you don't know as much about the topic as maybe you think you should. And oftentimes nerves are going to play into you kind of clamming up or not understanding the question. It's okay to ask for the question to be clarified as well. Sometimes that becomes awkward, but if you really don't understand what you're being asked, don't try and answer it.
And if you're in the middle, if somebody asks you a question that's clearly going to take a while too, and you're running out of time, as a session chair, just be aware of how long your responses are, and it's okay to say, it looks like we're running out of time. Just help us out. Because that's really frustrating too. Yeah.
All right, so moving on to our last planned portion. How to win a presentation award. There's no easy answer, but what I thought we would do is run through the criteria on which you're being evaluated and give you a couple of pointers for things to avoid, things that really, if they happen to you, would make it more difficult to win a presentation award. So the criteria, basically, we have 4 criteria on which student presentations are evaluated. Originality, got a little fast. Scientific merit, the overall quality of the presentation, which is a lot of what we've been spending time on this morning. And student knowledge. So again, 4 criteria. There's some number of points associated with each criteria. And then, of course, you get an overall score. So what exactly does originality mean? Well, the way we define it when we're giving these criteria to our evaluators is to ask them, does this research feel creative? Does the approach use novel methods, or at least methods in a unique or different way from the sort of standard that we might all be used to? And did you as a judge, did you as an evaluator, did you learn something new, something sort of unexpected? So when we think about this broad criteria of originality, this is sort of what the judges are asked to evaluate. Now, what I will say, at this point, your research project is what it is. It's hard to change that between now and tomorrow when you're giving your presentation. That being said, context, the intro, that broad scale picture that we've been talking about can go a long way to helping you in this category, right? So even with the same research project, if you frame it in a way that makes it more compelling, those sorts of things can lead you to score higher in that category. Scientific merit, of course, this includes things like background, again, placing your work in the appropriate scientific context.
no one, I shouldn't say no one, but at this point, it's really difficult to do something so novel that no one has contributed something previously. Making sure you put your work in that context is appropriate. Appropriate analyses, so this is sort of one of the cores of this sort of scientific merit category. Did they collect the appropriate data to ask the question, and did they analyze those data in a manner which would allow them to address their hypotheses? Following up on that, are the conclusions and interpretations well justified? Seems straightforward, but a lot of times this can be a hiccup for folks. Again, the quality of the presentation, this is mostly what we've been focusing on this morning. Is it well organized? Is it balanced? Did you spend, here's it seems obvious, but you'd imagine how often it happens that someone in a 12-minute talk spends 7 minutes on introductory material. Placing your work in broad context is really important. But what's most important is telling us the cool stuff that you did. 7 minutes on introductory material is not okay. And that's kind of what we're talking about with balance. Thinking about this narrative arc that Nick talked about and finding the time to hit on all those different sort of components. And then, of course, again, color, slide design. These things matter. We haven't talked very much about specific colors, but everyone knows, right? You should know there are certain color combinations that you absolutely must avoid. Red, green, blue, green. I mean, especially things that for which a not insignificant portion of your audience might have trouble seeing. Thinking to student knowledge. So has the student given enough information to demonstrate that they have a sound and thorough understanding of the subject? Student involvement. This is actually a big one. It seems sort of odd, but particularly important for student presentation awards is that the project is the students, right? That you actually did the work, that you have ownership over this. It's not something that, you just sort of glommed onto that maybe a collaborator or your advisor or someone else was doing, that this is something that you've invested in. And then lastly, the questions component. This is huge. There are some judges that will take away 25% of your overall grade if you do not leave time for questions.
I will do that.
That can be a moral sin. So even if the rest of your presentation was fantastic, if you finish right at the yellow-headed blackbird call and they immediately move to the next person, your chance of winning a student presentation award just dropped by 25, 30% for a lot of judges. We don't prescribe how judges deal with that, but it can be very difficult to win. Furthermore, not handling questions in a sort of appropriate way can be really damaging to your chances. In part because what that might indicate is a less thorough understanding or a reduction in sort of the amount that you might have been involved. So don't ignore that question period if you're interested in sort of competing for student presentation award. One thing you can do, this was hinted at, I think, is particularly, so Nick mentioned that perhaps being a little light on methods can be something you can do to save time. The other thing that does is it almost builds in ready-made questions. Because a lot of times someone might ask, oh, can you tell me more about the methods you use for that particular part? And right there, you should have a question that you should be able to answer, right? So in that sense, you can actually design your talk to sort of guide. It's not perfect. I can't guarantee it. But you can design your talk, particularly if you're nervous about the type of questions you get, to lead the audience to ask questions that you are comfortable with. So don't underestimate the importance of that question and answer period.
Having extra slides like anticipate some questions and having extra slides that explain those is really, really an effective way to score well in terms of presentation.
do you kind of have a recommended percentage of time that you would say that we should dedicate to questions, or it's kind of up to you, or?
I would try and be done in a 15-minute talk, try and be done in 12 minutes.
I would say, yeah, 12 to 13 minutes, at least 2 minutes.
At least 2 minutes.
Not 5, because then you're standing up there and you also leave yourself open to questions that will really challenge it. So if you can, if you're practicing, I would really shoot for finishing your talk in 12 to 13 minutes, which is sort of the recommended guideline.
And if you try to think about the question, like anticipating questions, also what your response will be to, because I feel like judging talks when you have somebody who has a really polished, rehearsed talk, and then you get to the question and answer, and it sounds really sloppy, and it's like that's the same person, it's really obvious. So I think it's good to sort of practice through what your responses might be for various methods, questions, or interpretation.
And then the last thing I'll say, and this is just because this is a question that sometimes comes up, there's actually very few specific awards, and by that, what I mean is that all of the presentations that are part of the student award competition are basically in the running for just general best talk awards. It's not like you're trying to win the best talk on bluebird behavior, right? Or the best talk given by an undergraduate from a liberal arts school east of whatever. There are very few of those. Basically we have a pool of the best talks. We're not allocating them to phylogenetics versus physiology versus behavior versus conservation. So sometimes people wonder about that. They think that oh well, I noticed my talk was on phylogenetics, and I noticed that there were 2 talk winners on phylogenetics, so they must have had 2 winners, and that's sort of why I didn't win. Just some information about the process.
Isn't there a special conservation award?
There is, but that is extremely latest. So there is a conservation award. The AOU gives out a conservation award. The way the conservation award works is we decide on the winners, and we say which one is most conservation focused. We'll give that one the conservation award. But so in that context, even though it is conservation, we do it after the fact. We take the one that most appropriately fits. Like Nick won a few years ago. Nick won one from the Canadian Society because he was talking about birds that live in Canada. But that's what I mean. Like at the end, the Canadian Society is like, hey, we'd like to give these to either Canadian students or people that work on birds in Canada. So we just looked through the list. This is how we got this from the Canadian Society. But that's what I mean. Like, that's sort of all done kind of after we decide on the very best one. So.
I think it's also important to remember that broadly people are getting better at giving talks. So if you give a talk that you're really, really happy with and you don't win an award, it's not like a personal slight to you. You should just, be happy with what you do and also realize that talk quality over the past decade has really, really improved. People care more about all of the things we've been talking about today, and so it's becoming more challenging to win talk awards, which makes it maybe more exciting when you get one, but also should help you realize that even if you give an out-of-the-park talk, it may not win, but that doesn't mean it wasn't good. So remember that, because I won my first talk award as a postdoc. It was the last time I could ever win a talk award, and I was bitter about it up until that point. And now I feel fine, but I should have been because I give fine talks. There's a lot of people that are giving really good talks now.
I've been judging presentation awards, I think, since 2007. I've been in charge from the AOU standpoint for the last 3 years. And just to reiterate what Scott said, the quality of student talks is really, really good. The quality of student talks on average is way better than the quality of any other group of talks. Way better than faculty talks. Those are the lowest.
Yeah, at basically any meeting you go to. So we went over time. If anyone has any questions about presentations or anything that we've talked about, feel free to find us during the conference. We'll be here. All of us are here all week. And otherwise, I think there's a 15-minute break before Twitter starts. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.